One question that comes up on occasion is how do I change all of the files in my workspace for Open Roads or Open Rail or Open Site to use a different font? What are all the considerations that I need to take into account? And so I'm going to start with first the basics of MicroStation, for example, your cell libraries. And so in your cell libraries, you're going to have certain cells that have fonts associated with them. And so if you're using, for example, an old MicroStation resource font or perhaps an engineering true type font that's delivered the workspace and you want to switch to Arial, you'll want to go through each of your models within your cell library and make sure that those fonts are changed. And so your starting point would more than likely be your cell libraries to make those changes. Another area will be your custom line styles. You may have custom line styles, for example, that use fonts, especially for mapping of survey, where you may have fonts embedded inside those custom line styles. And that's beyond the scope of this particular video. There are other videos that can be made available that talk about how to redo the custom line styles with different fonts. But this particular video, I'm just going to point out that you may want to redo the custom line styles that are using fonts that are not of the font that you want to switch to, because you don't want inconsistencies where you have different fonts used. And so also you must consider then your custom line styles. In our migration utilities, there is a particular utility called Font Remap that can be used just with MicroStation. It doesn't have to use ORD to do this, but it contains a spreadsheet that allows you a before and after font selection, so that let's say that you wanted to update all of your models in a cell library, and this is going to take some time to do manually. If you use the Font Remap tool, it can go in and update all the fonts and all the models within a single file, somewhat kind of like in a batch mode, but you would still need to review each cell after this is done and make sure that everything still fits within the origins of where it's supposed to, for example, title blocks. Another consideration, we did talk about cell libraries, but you may have reference files that are used within your workspace, for example, title blocks. In this case, a DGN file, or you may need to go in, you may have some common references that are used for all your jobs, and maybe they have the old resource fonts or a different true type font you want to switch. So you also need to consider any type of DGNs that are used as common references within your workspace. And another area that we need to take a look at fonts and changing is element templates. In particular, element templates used for displaying a terrain model. They have typically in these terrain model settings, they have text styles that are selected here. And so you'll want to make sure that you have the appropriate text style selected with the appropriate fonts. Then within your text styles themselves, you have the ability to set your particular fonts. And so you'll want to make sure that you're in the appropriate DGN library and that you have the appropriate fonts set that you want to use. For example, in our delivered workspace, we are now delivering a set of text styles for Arial, and the font is, of course, set to Arial. And so you'll want to make sure that your text styles are updated appropriately. And the same holds true then with your text favorites. And so if I go in to look at, for example, some text favorites, you'll want to make sure that your particular fonts that you have set in here, whether it's through a text style or if you've manually selected your font, or both, that they are in line with your new selection. And so you may have to go through each of your text favorites and verify that they are indeed using your new text style and or font. And just a little tip here, you do not have to set a text style within your text favorite. You can manually pick your font size, bold, italics, underline, superscript or subscript, as well as justification, without setting a text style and tying a text style to the text favorite. Because if your text styles are in a file other than your text favorites file and you pick it, then it's going to copy the text style into your text favorites file, and that can get a little bit confusing sometimes. And so if you decide not to set a text style on each of your text favorites, that's perfectly fine. Then another area that you have to take a look at with your fonts is where you have your annotations set up for OpenRoads Designer. And so if we go into look at our DGN lib with annotations, we may actually have text styles set in there that may correspond to, for example, the old font, and those would need to be switched as well. So if I open up Explorer and I go down to our annotation groups, and I'm just going to take a look at a couple of them here. And so let's take a look at stationing. We'll right click manage that. And this is where we'll want to take a look at our text category and make sure that we have the appropriate text style override. If we have a style override selected, that we change that to make sure we're using our new font. Now, this is not a required setting. If it's not set, it uses the text style or the text information coming directly out of the text favorite. This is more like an override field, but it's something that you don't want to forget. And just element templates in general, sometimes you may have, for example, an entry in here for text style or text style override within your element templates that is not an element template used for a train model, but just a general element template used for everyday drafting. And so again, you want to make sure that these text styles or text style overrides are all in compliance with your new font settings that you are wishing to change over to. Another area that we have to take a look at is our dimension styles. And so, of course, you'd want to be in the DGN library with those, but they too have a setting for text. And so make sure that your dimension styles have the appropriate information set in them as well. And then if we take a look at, for example, our seed files, we may have a default font set within the seed file. And so if you go to your text editor and look at that default text style and or font, you'll want to make sure that those are, again, in compliance with what you're changing to. And so if you go to your text editor, make sure that you have the appropriate default font. And if you want to, a default text style. Usually people don't do this in the seed file, but they may go ahead and set their default font and a size. And so make sure in your master seed files that you have those set as well. And this should probably be checked in any seed files, whether it's a sheet model seed file or drawing seed file, a design model seed file. Make sure that you've got the appropriate fonts set in the sizes for all of your different seed files within your workspace.